guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I am going to be showing you all of my fantasy romance books. So I have been here on BookTube for over 3.5 years now and I have still not made a bookshelf tour. The whole process seems really daunting to me, really exhausting, and to be honest, bookshelf tours and things like that are not something that I personally watch anyway. So I am planning on posting a full bookshelf tour in the year of 2021, but when I do that, I'm not going to be pulling down every single book anyway. So the majority of my fantasy romance books are not special editions, so you wouldn't be seeing them in that video. And I know that you guys are especially interested in the fantasy romance that I've read, the fantasy romance that I own, so I thought I would make a separate video for you guys. Now, when I have seen videos like this before, they tend to focus on collections of books that have a lot of editions or fancy editions. A very popular collection type video is Classics Collection. If you put Classics Collection into YouTube, you are going to get tons of videos. I know Ashley from A Frolic Through Fiction just did her Classic Collection. I think she's also done like a mythology one as well. So types of genres that have like really beautiful books. However, in this one, I'm going to be showing you all of the books I have, telling you a little bit of what they're about, because a lot of you guys have been asking me for fantasy romance recommendations. Deep diving into fantasy romance and looking into it as a specific genre, finding things like indie fantasy romance books is something that is all very new to me. I have only been looking into this particular genre for just over a year now. So in terms of ones that I've read, there aren't actually that many. That being said, I am going to be making a fantasy romance recommendations video very soon, giving you a lot of information about a few that I have read and I have really enjoyed. But I know you guys are constantly asking me for more and more recommendations on top of the ones that I have read. So I thought I would just show you all of the ones that I have, that I've read, ones that I haven't read and I'm interested in, and maybe you guys will find something that you want to pick up from this video. Now, when I decided to put this video together, I was going to show you all of my fantasy romance, including Sarah J Maas. However, I realized that she has a new book published soon, and when my copies of that book arrives, I will have 26 Sarah J Maas books alone. So I am going to be saving that for another video. There will be no Sarah J Maas in this, and when all of my copies of A Court of Silver Flames arrive, I may make a separate video for all of her books, because I have multiple editions of a lot of them. I have some like special editions, I have exclusive covers and things like that. So please let me know if that video is something that you would like to see, and if so, I will make that at a later date. I would also like to put a little caveat on this video and let you guys know that there is a very big possibility that these are not all of the fantasy romance that I own. All of my shelves are in alphabetical order by author. They are not separated by genre, so I had to hunt through 7 bookshelves to try and get all of the fantasy romance off it. As well as that, in traditional publishing, it isn't very common to have fantasy romance as a kind of specific genre. They all tend to be marketed as fantasy, and it is only when you read them that you find out the extent of the romance in there, whether it is largely focused on romance, whether it's in there just a little bit, if it's even included at all. So I imagine that this is going to be more common with the young adult fantasy that I own, but if it isn't marketed as fantasy romance, if I haven't heard that it's particularly romantic, if I haven't read it yet, then I won't know if I would class it as fantasy romance or just fantasy with a little bit of romance in. I have separated this into 2 sections as well. The first section we have are all of the traditional published fantasy romance books I have. The second section are all of the indie or self-published fantasy romance that I have, and within that I have separated all of the young adult to the best of my knowledge. Once again, there may be a couple that end up in the wrong category because I have not yet read them, but I have tried my best to section this off a little bit. And now I think it is time to take a look at my fantasy romance collection. So first off, we are going to be starting with the traditionally published books, and within that we will be starting young adult. So the first couple I have are the first 2 books in the Serpent and Dove series by Shelby McCurrin. This is a young adult historical fantasy romance that has a medieval French setting setting. In this, we are following a witch and a witch hunter. The witch is Louise LeBlanc. She has run away from her coven and she is making a living for herself as a thief. The witch hunter is Reed Diggory, and he is part of this religious order of witch hunters. They are forced to enter into a marriage, and that forces both parties to confront what they think they know about each other and what the truth of both orders may actually be. Kingdom of the Wicked by Kerri Maniscalco is another one with a historical European setting. This one is set in Sicily and it follows Amelia, who has a twin sister called Vittoria. Very early on in the book, Vittoria is violently murdered and Amelia starts to dabble in dark magics to try and find out who killed Vittoria and seek her revenge, and in the process of doing this she summons the god of hell, Wrath. This is one that isn't extremely romancy in the first installment, but I do think that there are going to be more romantic developments throughout the series. This is also a Fairy Loot edition and it is one of the most stunning editions I own. It has an exclusive cover, gorgeous stencil sprayed edges, a silver foiled design on the naked hardcover, and exclusive art under the dust jacket as well. The Remnant Chronicles is a series I have heard amazing things about. It is a young adult high fantasy series, and I believe that the main character is a princess who runs away on her wedding day and she is being tracked by two people. One is the prince she was going to marry, one is an assassin. However, the reader does not know which one it is, and I do believe that this is heavily romantic as well. Bonecryer's Moon by Catherine Purdy is in a similar vein to Serpent and Dove and Kingdom of the Wicked. It has an ambiguous European setting, it seems very historical, and it follows this order of bone criers whose job is to ferry the spirits of the dead to their final resting place. However, to complete this ritual they must kill their one true love. We have a Les who is trying to complete the ritual when she gets kidnapped by Bastion, who has a vendetta against the bone criers because his father was killed by one. And our third character in here is Sabine, who is determined to get her friend back. This is the Owlcrate exclusive edition, so we have sprayed edges, it's signed by the author, and it also has an exclusive cover. I have two books by Margaret Rogerson. I have only read An Enchantment of Ravens so far. An Enchantment of Ravens follows a human girl who lives on the outskirts of the fairy world, and this is a world where fairies can't make anything, so they can't paint, they can't cook, and so they pay humans to do this for them. One day the Prince of Autumn commissions our main character to paint a portrait of him, and this causes a whole world of trouble when she accidentally paints human sorrow into his eyes, and he takes her to the Autumn Court to explain that everything was just a mistake so that he can keep his throne. Sorcery of Thorns is one that I'm very excited to read. It follows a main character called Elizabeth who works in this library full of magical grimoires that turn into monsters. Elizabeth has been raised to believe that all sorcerers are evil, and when one of her magical grimoires escapes and she is implicated in the crime, she must turn towards her sworn enemy Nathaniel Thorne, who is a sorcerer, to help get her out of the situation she has found herself in. The next couple I think are young adult, although I'm not 100% sure. The first one is The Falconer by Elizabeth May. This one is a historical fantasy that is set in Edinburgh in 1844 and follows the 18-year-old Lady Elena Cameron, who is the daughter of a marquess. However, there is more to Elena than there seems, because in her spare time she hunts down the fairies that she absolutely despises. Next up we have the first three books in the Chronicles of Ixia by Maria V. Snyder. I believe that these three form the original trilogy, and then there were three added on later. The first book in this series is Poison Study, and we are following a young woman called Yelena who is about to be executed for murder when she is offered the opportunity to become the food taster for the commander of Ixia instead. As you can probably tell, all of the copies that I have in this series are secondhand that have been picked up from various places, and one of them is even an ex-library copy. Moving into the ones that are firmly adult, we have the first two books in the Kingmaker Chronicles by Amanda Boucher. This series follows a young woman called Kat who has escaped from the icy magical kingdom of the north and is currently a soothsayer in the circus, hiding from the people she ran away from, when the handsome yet intimidating southern warlord Griffin kidnaps her to take back to the country that his sister rules so that they can make use of her unique magical abilities. This one is set in a world that is inspired by ancient Greece. It's really funny, and the smut and the romance in there is pretty decent as well. A Kiss of Shadows by Lauren K. Hamilton is another quite popular one. This one is the first book in the Mary Gentry series, where we follow a young woman called Meredith Gentry who ran away from the High Court of Fairy 3 years ago after finding out that her aunt, the Queen of Air and Darkness, wanted her dead, and she now works for a supernatural detective agency. I've heard that this one is incredibly snotty, incredibly erotic, and has quite a lot of explicit sexual content. Dark Fever by Karen Marie Moning is a very well-known one. It is the first book in the Fever series, and this one is more of a paranormal series, I would say, and the first book contains pretty much no romance, but this one follows a young woman called Mac who moves to Dublin in Ireland because her sister was brutally murdered there. So Mac takes it upon herself to investigate, and while she is doing that, she stumbles across the world of the Fae and a mysterious bookshop owner called Jericho Barons. Angel's Blood by Nalini Singh is the first book in the Guild Hunters series. I have been recommended Nalini Singh's books endlessly across all of her series, but I decided that I would start with Angel's Blood because this has been recommended specifically because I love Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas. In this one, we are following a vampire hunter called Elena Devereaux who has been hired by the Archangel Raphael to hunt down an archangel gone bad. Dark Lover by J.R. Ward is the first book in the Black Dagger Brotherhood series, which I believe is a very smutty vampire series. There are 19 books in this series so far. I don't believe it is yet finished, and every book or every few books follows a different member of the Black Dagger Brotherhood. This first installment follows Wrath, who has to help out his friend's half-breed daughter when she becomes an orphan after her father is killed. And the last 3 of the traditionally published books are the first 3 books in the Tyrant Soul series by C.L. Wilson. This is a high fantasy fae romance that follows Rain Tyrant Soul, who is the current king of the Fae. He is desperately searching for a way to save his people when he stumbles across the young mortal girl Elisetta Barastani and quickly discovers that she is his soulmate. This is unusual because the kings of the Fae don't often find their soulmates, and if they do, they are definitely not mortal. This one is a good blend of romance and high fantasy with a decent amount of politics, and a lot of the elements of this story hinge on a 1,000-year-old war between the Fae and the mages. Moving on to the indies, there's only one of these that I know for sure is young adult, and that one is Disenchanted by Brianna Shigalski. This one is another historical fantasy that follows a Breton princess who, on the day of her coronation, receives a mysterious letter from the Witch of the Lupine Grotto, which sends her into the woods with a mysterious stranger searching for an enchantress who can help to cure her darkness forever. So as far as I'm aware, from this point onwards, everything is either new adult or adult, and one that is extremely popular, especially at the moment, is the Blood and Ash series by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This one is a high fantasy with some paranormal elements that follows a young girl called Poppy who is the Maiden. This means that she can never be looked upon, never be touched, and also cannot experience pleasure. Poppy is going to become a gift to the gods and will ascend on her 19th birthday, and to ensure that she is kept safe and everything runs smoothly, she is assigned a very skilled personal guard named Hawk who has a mysterious past. Trickery by Jamin Eve and Jane Washington follows Willa Knight, who is a non-magical being that is in servitude to the gods. In this world, you have creatures called souls who one day could be chosen to become gods. Everybody who is a non-magical being in this world has to serve them, and Willa is thankful that the village that she lives in is far away from the cities where the souls dwell. That is until one day she is awarded a position to serve at the top soul academy in the world, and there she must serve 5 arrogant and very powerful brothers. Infernal Magic by C.N. Crawford is the first book in the Demons of Fire and Night series, but it is also book 1 of the large expanded universe that C.N. Crawford writes. This one follows Ursula, who has been suffering with amnesia, and apparently she has never heard of hellhounds until a very attractive one breaks into her flat on her 18th birthday, and on top of that, it seems at one point in her life she struck a bargain with the fire goddess. Now Ursula must make another deal with the devil and allow the hellhound Kester to train her to become a hellhound herself so they can work together against the demons hellbent on destroying them. Fae by Cassandra Fae is the first book in the Daughters of Eltir Akira series. Faye is a cursed and enslaved immortal who is doing everything she can to avoid any more suffering and just make it through the day. Kiernan is a legendary warrior who has lived through centuries of bloodshed, war, and killing. Kiernan believes that he deserves to suffer, but he doesn't believe Faye does and wants to do anything in his power to save her from another 2,000 years of suffering. Oathtaker by Audrey Gray is the first book in the Kingdom of Runes series. This one follows Haven Ashwood, who is saved from captivity by the Prince of Penrith. After this, she spends her days serving as the prince's bodyguard, and she spends her nights fighting monsters outside the castle walls. One day, the monsters kidnap Prince Bell, and Haven must join Archeron Halfbane and a band of immortals to rescue her friend. The Bridge Kingdom and the Traitor Queen by Danielle L. Jensen are the first two books in the Bridge Kingdom series. This one follows a young woman called Lara who, along with her sisters, has been trained from birth to become an assassin with the end goal of assassinating the king of the Bridge Kingdom. However, when Lara is chosen to be the one who will marry the Bridge King, she starts to get to know her husband and his kingdom and questions everything she thought she knew about herself, her father, and the Bridge King. A Deal with the Elf King by Elise Cover is a married to magic novel. It is a standalone high fantasy romance with a happily ever after. Thousands of years ago, humans were hunted to the point of extinction by powerful magical races until a treaty was formed. Now the elves regularly take young women from Luella's village to become human queens. Luella is 19 years old and happy to have escaped this fate and has dedicated herself to becoming her town's healer. That is until the Elf King unexpectedly turns up and decides to make Luella his new bride. Gods and Monsters by Janie Marie has one of the most beautiful covers I have ever seen, and it is definitely the artwork on the books of this series that drew me to it. This series is set in a world where a plague has started to ravage Earth and humanity's saviors are monsters. The main character Jane is as terrified of the plague as everybody else, however she has decided to fight back. And when the legendary David and his companions sweep across the country fulfilling their duty to the human race, they cross paths with Jane, who as it turns out is destined to save mankind. Queen of Empire by H.R. Moore is the first book in the Relic trilogy. This one follows Anita, who has the gift of being able to see the energy of other people, and she also won every physical challenge that she's ever entered. One day, the powerful and attractive descendants Marcus and Alexander arrive in the kingdom where Anita resides, and soon after, the sudden death of their ruler Christiana throws the kingdom into turmoil. I currently have 3 books by KJ Sutton. As a lot of you guys probably know, Fortuna Swan is one of my favorite series. This one is a dark fairy romance that follows a young woman called Fortuna who is a nightmare, which means that she can make people believe that they are experiencing their worst fears. 2 years prior to the start of this series, Fortuna's brother goes missing and he has disappeared without a trace. Fortuna cannot find a single trace of him anywhere. That is until she is approached by a very powerful fairy male who claims that he knows where Fortuna's brother is and he can take her directly to him, providing that she will marry him. I also have book 1 of the Charlie Travesty series, which KJ Sutton co-authored with Jesse Elliott. This was published as a serial in 4 installments and bound into 1 book, and there will be a second set of installments coming very soon. This one is a vampire romance that follows a vampire princess called Charlie Travesty who is about to go through a process that will change her life forever. In this world, around a vampire's 23rd birthday, they will wake up and their eyes will have changed colour, and that colour will denote what sector of the city they live in. However, Charlie's eyes turn out to be a colour that nobody expected, and this changes the trajectory of Charlie's life forever. A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair is the first book in the Hades and Persephone series, and as you may be able to tell, this is a Hades and Persephone retelling. In this one, Persephone is the goddess of spring. She's supposed to be able to make flowers and plants grow. However, since she was a little girl, they have all shriveled at her touch. While in the mortal world, Persephone stumbles across Hades, who has built a gambling empire, and finds herself entering into into an impossible contract with him where Persephone must somehow master her magic and create life in the underworld or lose her freedom forever. I do own all 4 books in the Bargainer series by Laura Thalassa, however I have lent out book 1, Rhapsodic, to a friend. The Bargainer series is a fairy romance that follows a siren called Callie who has a string of hundreds of black beads up her arm, each one representing a debt that she owes to the Bargainer. The Bargainer is usually very punctual about collecting his debts, and even though she hasn't seen him for 7 years, Callie knows that one day he will eventually come to collect. The first book, Rhapsodic, is told in 2 timelines. The first timeline is when Callie is a teenager and she is gathering all these debts that she now owes to the Bargainer, and in the present day timeline, the Bargainer has finally come to collect what Callie owes him, which leaves her wondering where he has been the last 7 years. And then finally we have Friends with the Monsters by Albany Walker. I have to confess I know very little about this because it has a very ambiguous synopsis. The main character of this one makes friends with monsters, however she is also the scariest monster that she knows and she thinks that she is the bad guy. And based on the limited information available without reading this one, that is all I am able to tell you. So those are all of the fantasy romance books that I own to the best of my knowledge. Please let me know down in the comments whether you got any new recommendations from this video. Also, please let me know about that Sarah J Maas video. Would you like me to make that for you guys? And of course, as usual, if there is a fantasy romance book or series that you would recommend that I don't seem to own, please pop that down in the comments as well and I will definitely check it out because I'm always looking for more fantasy romance recommendations. But that is about it for this video, guys, so please don't forget to like if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish body butter and candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you will go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.